Hi, I'm Rebecca Barton, and this is my tort liability presentation. So the first thing, what is tort? Tort is an actionable or civil wrong committed against one person by another that is independent of contract. So there's two types. First, there's intentional, which is a deliberate act committed against another person. So you're going to see like assault, battery, defamation, imprisonment, trespassing are all intentional types of tort. The other type is unintentional, which is a wrong committed by someone who fails to exercise that degree of care in doing what is otherwise permissible. So negligence, injury, breach of duty, proximity, those are all things that fall under the unintentional category. The first case that I found was Mitchell versus Cedar Rapids Community School District. It involved a ninth grade student who was special ed. They had an IQ of 67 and they were on an IEP. This student went to an after hours off campus thing with another student at the building, and their sexual assault occurred. The thing with this case was a teacher actually witnessed the victim having relations with another student, but she assumed that it was appropriate and consensual. It wasn't, because the victim had an IQ of a 67, so they didn't really quite understand what was going on. So the special ed student skipped school with the other student and attended just some, after campus, off campus, after hours thing where a sexual assault occurred. The jury ended up finding the district negligent and failing to supervise the special education student. The school fought the case because it happened after school hours, but because the student had an IEP, um, the school should have been keeping a better eye on the student and making sure that they were at school. Reactive measures that could happen are being more proactive at notifying parents of unexcused absences. The parents didn't even know that the student had left and was not at school anymore. This is more important, especially when dealing with students who have IEPs and are special education students. There should be more surveillance in school buildings to ensure students are not leaving without being checked out or that they're getting signed out. Some proactive measures are encouraging staff to report things quicker when noticing, especially like when it came to that relationship. The staff member should have reported it to make sure that it was a consensual thing, and also requiring staff to watch side doors better to make sure students are not leaving in the middle of the day. Professional ethics, providing a better understanding of tort law for students and parents, staff, and more training on how to keep students in special education classes safe in relationships, and also how to help them understand consent better. The second case that I studied was Johnson Johnson versus School District of Millard. So in this case, an employee failed to properly supervise students in their care. It involved a first grade student who ended up being injured during a music class when they were learning the song London Bridges, and then they played the game London Bridges. The teacher let the students play the game on their own unsupervised while they were working on the whiteboard with their back completely to the room. The student got flung into the bookcase during the game and resulted in getting 50 stitches. The student actually told the kids during the game to stop and that they were getting too rough, and the kids didn't listen. And since the teacher had their back to the room, they had no idea what was going on. The verdict came out that the student was awarded money for injury, medical expenses, and the school was found negligent. So reactive measures that could be taken is give the teacher more training in classroom management, provide the teacher with an assistant for some time to help manage the classroom, and have the teacher fill out an accident report. Proactive measures, proper training in classroom management. It's apparent that that teacher needed a better understanding of how to manage the classroom and to keep an eye on the students, and also other adults in classrooms, so there are extra eyes and more than one testimony. If something were this to happen again, it was the teacher's word against all of the kids' words. Professional ethics, emphasize classroom management and the importance of always keeping an eye on the class, especially when it's elementary students and younger elementary students, and then provide some more classroom management classes and training. The third one that I had is Mosley versus Portland Public Schools. So this one happened to a 15-year-old girl who was involved in a fist fight during lunch. She ended up in the fist fight, and the other student that she was in the fight with pulled a knife out and began to stab the victim. The school had security, but no one was around during the fight to stop it. The victim was stabbed in the face and the chest and ended up with permanent scarring. Her parents sued the Portland Public Schools for negligence. The case ended up going to Supreme Court, and they found that there was not enough evidence to support the claim that school was negligent. Oregon has a discretionary immunity statute, which basically states that they're not liable for anything that was to happen if an employee was on duty and failed to exercise or measure their job. So because of that, the school actually ended up winning the case. Reactive measures: have some cameras and more staff available during passing periods and lunch, and keep those two students that ended up in the fight separated for the remainder of the year. Proactive measures: staff that is on duty during lunch needs to be continually walking around and paying attention to students. And install metal detectors so no knives or guns can be brought to school to hopefully prevent this from happening again. Professional ethics: training and stopping and preventing fights for all staff and security in that building. The fourth case that I looked at was Evans versus Oak Missions Public Schools. This one was a high school student who received injuries during physical education. This student was a football player and a baseball player, and this physical education class was actually taught by the football coach. The student had received 2 injuries prior to this semester. He ended up separating his shoulder during a football injury, and then during baseball fell and jammed his shoulder. Per doctor and his parents, he was to sit out during any sports, and he could return to sports during the next year. His physical education teacher was very aware of this because of the doctor's note and also because he was the football coach. During this PE class, the student ended up doing some wrestling activity, which was part of the class, and dislocated his shoulder. This, of course, the parents took the school to court, but it ended up that there was an exemption from liability, and it basically stated that they're not liable if loss or claim results from participation in or practice of any interscholastic or other athletic contest sponsored or conducted by the school. So because of that, the family and the high school student lost out and did not win the case, and the public school won. Reactive measures, so this doesn't happen again. Discuss with the football coach about honoring students' doctor's notes. It's important that they are aware of them and that they are honoring them and following through on what they say. Proactive measures: if students have doctor's notes about not playing sports, make sure they're not taking PE classes. That student could have been enrolled in a different class. Conduct more walkthroughs to make sure staff is watching class properly. This probably could have been prevented if the teacher had been paying better attention to the class. And provide better equipment in PE to help keep students more safe. Professional ethics: have more opportunities for staff to take classroom management classes, and educate staff in negligence and how to prevent it. The last case that I looked at was actually Barrett versus USD 259. This involved a 12th grade student who collapsed on the football field during mandatory football practices. It was in the summer when they were practicing, and they were required to wear their helmets and not take them off. The day started at 83 degrees, and as the day went on, it got hotter and hotter. The only thing that the students were allowed to do was take a water break every 20 minutes, and they only had 5 minutes to drink water. They were not allowed to take their helmets off, to sit down, to get cooled off, or anything like that. The student Barrett actually ended up not feeling very good and told the first station's coach that he was at that he didn't feel good, and all they did was tell him to go get a drink. At the second station, he still did not feel good, and they instructed him to drink water and made him sit out. As the practice got over, he began to leave the field, and he actually collapsed. They took him to the hospital, and he died in the hospital the next day. The verdict: under the recreational use exception to the KTCA, a governmental entity or an employee acting within the scope of the employee's employment shall not be liable for damages resulting from any claim for injuries. And the rest of that verdict goes on. But basically, the school was not liable for what happened from the damages because of that clause that the school had already established. Reactive measures, training for coaches on heat illness prevention, and coaches need to be paying better attention to students and respect when they do not feel good. They should be allowed to do more than just get a drink and sit down. Proactive measures, provide alternative locations to practice if extremely hot, training for all coaches on heat illness prevention, and football practice there should be a rule regulating if they can practice outside. Like if it's over 100, maybe they need to practice inside, or maybe they should be allowed to take off their helmet and that stuff. Professional ethics, establish policies that keep students safe when practicing in heat, and mandatory training for all coaches on heat illness and how to prevent that. And this page is my references.